Hello, my name is Jacob Todson, and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. Today, I'm in the forest of western Sweden to talk about a subject that needs more attention in the larger Norse Pagan conversation, and that is the ancient religious history of Sweden. Behind me here are some of the rock carvings of Tanum, and so I want to begin the conversation by talking about this era in history, the Bronze Age, and it's something that I don't think a lot of Norse pagans, particularly those in the United States, know about. Now, admittedly, I am not that much of a Swedish history expert, and that is why I brought someone who knows a lot more about these rock carvings, and that certain someone is building their career preserving ancient sites such as this.
I am Elin Pirso, and I'm a huge history nerd and also have a degree in cultural heritage studies and archaeology, and today we are at Ekhagen's ancient village in Sweden. I have been going to this ancient village since I was a child. My historical interest is very natural. It has been with me since childhood. The rock carvings are a type of ancient leaving from the Bronze Age, the Scandinavian Bronze Age. So 1800 BC to around 500 BC in Scandinavia. The people who made them, besides living during the Bronze Age, I mean, we don't really know that much about them. We don't know if it was mainly men, women, spiritual people, children. We don't really know who carved them or really what they wanted to tell us. I would describe the rock carvings as children's drawings, actually. We've all been children, we've all drawn images, I hope. It is these simple carvings that you can easily make out, oh, this is a cow, of course, this is a boat, this is a human. But then there are like these mystical things that show up there, here and there.
Now, of course, I do actually want to talk a little bit about the experience here. You know, this is my first time in Sweden, and less than 24 hours, I have now been in one of the oldest archaeological sites here. And I have to say, seeing these in person is much different than seeing them online, which is what I'm really hoping to do, is be able to capture the essence of the rock carvings here at Tanum by giving you this interview with Elin and taking you to the site and showing you what they look like when you're actually here and not a photograph like right above them. Because it's so interesting to think that people thousands of years ago were sitting here performing a ritual, carving these into the rocks, singing, dancing, drinking, and doing all kinds of things we will never know about to create these very unique, slightly strange images. I mean, over here you have what it looks like a bunch of ostriches or emus being hunted by very wide men with a UFO above them dropping eggs. That's at least how my mind is interpreting it. And of course you have the famous spirit ships, which are seen all across the rock carvings. And then down here you have some really interesting images of cows. Looks like Nessie in Loch Ness, maybe a whale, and then some strange symbol, and then a dragon maybe? So you can really let your mind go crazy looking at these things, imagining what these people were envisioning. Ultimately, we're never going to know. Some of these images are a little bit easier to understand than others, such as hunters or lovers, while some others can be really mysterious and definitely allude to the religious past of the people that carved these thousands of years ago.
So I have noticed that a common theme as well is these figures with big hands, and they occur on many different places and in many different like petroglyph sites. And I think it has to do with either some ritual or some deity of some sort that is like handing out something is going on, because it keeps occurring again and again. Maybe he's throwing out seeds, who knows, maybe it's a fertility ritual, a fertility god. Maybe it's just like a representation and a personification of like, crops, like planting the crops. Amongst all of these carvings, there is common themes. There is depictions of people. There are depictions of what we assume to be deities, different gods, and so on. And you can actually see like the difference between a dog, a moose, a horse pretty easily. You wouldn't think that with the simplicity of the carving, but and there's a lot of boats and sun wheels. So many boats and sun wheels.
So while looking at this as someone who is untrained in studying such things, I see something very ceremonial going on with this spirit ship behind me here. We have 3 figures kneeling in a small boat above a bigger boat / ski thing, sled, with another one on top of it. And then we have several figures, one that appears to have a club, another that definitely looks like they have a horn, and then we have an axe, and then some other clubs or spears or other ceremonial objects. Now this could be like a war band, people going to war, and that's why you have multiple weapon-shaped things and then one trumpet-looking thing. But again, this could be something ceremonial, and I think that's what really attracts people to the site is we really don't know. There's a lot of clues to go off of. And so, you know, certain of these symbols might imply certain things. Obviously, we have a lot of penises. So I think I'm going to ask Elin about these penises and what she thinks they mean.
So I have a theory, because some of the petroglyphs men, they have this big dick, right? And some of the women are depicted with like a braid, and they have a cup mark in between their legs. So my theory is that when you have like reached adulthood, that is when you get depicted with a penis, because then you're an adult male, and if you're an adult woman, you're depicted with a cup mark. So I think that the people who are depicted without, they haven't reached a certain type of, I think it has to do with status. I wouldn't think it is an impossible theory that it has to do something either with status, adulthood, reaching a certain point of manhood or womanhood, and so on.
So for all you sick people out there that were immediately going to comment about the penises, there's your serious answer.
The method that was used to carve them, what we have figured out is that, of course, they've used some kind of a chisel. If that was, what particular stone that was made out of, we don't know. Probably one stone here, dunk, 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 dunk. And that is how you can still make petroglyphs today.
So this is a great spot to actually talk about the preservations of sites such as this, because there is actually a lot of rock carvings right here, but you could barely see them because they have not been painted or restored. Now, from what I understand, this is kind of a debate on whether or not to continue to paint them as they were done theoretically in the past. Wait, do we know if they painted them?
We do not know if they painted them in the ancient past. It wouldn't surprise if they either filled them with seeds or something as offerings, the cup mark ones at least, or if they, during the seasons where berries and blooms and so on was leaves and so on that could color, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. We have no proof to say that they did. We paint them today for visibility reasons. If people see them, they can also study them, they can also come and look at them more easily. They're more easily accessible like that. Not all of them are painted today though. Not all of them are, because there is also the factor of that they can deteriorate faster if they are painted. So we have a big whole discussion about it within the archaeological world of Sweden right now.
Obviously, I'm kind of on the fence about it as well, because there's a lot of really intricate designs here I would love to know more about. However, it's just really hard to see them, especially with the sun. There's a room within the museum that shows that it's a recreation, that if they're carved into and you have bouncing, moving light like a fire, you can actually see them a lot better. So the theory is they weren't actually painted in the past, but they were just carved and then seen in the firelight or the light of the sun.
So what I believe we could learn from the, like as modern people learn from the rock carvings of Tanum, for example, I think that there is a playfulness to these, not only to the carvings, but to how they express culture and maybe religious practices and so on. They wanted to tell about their beliefs, for example. So I think that there is a playfulness there, and I think that they wanted to tell, and I think that it's also a great depiction of, like, there is stuff that is larger than life. There is stuff that is larger than every day, because they have depicted these huge deities with the big spears and mythological tastes, basically, that we have no idea what they mean anymore. So I think it shows, like, the very human side of, like, wanting to tell, wanting to show. That is the only way they could, like, communicate with other people outside of that little group. And I think that shows something, that if you want to share culture, you want to share beliefs, you want to expand and, like, come together, basically. And I think that's a good thing to have.
In my time exploring ancient sites, one of the meditations I like to do, especially when I have to come and go so fast, I haven't been able to spend as much time at a lot of these sites as I wish, just because of time constraints on filming. But one thing I really like to do briefly is just to almost imagine what the people would have been doing thousands of years ago when they carved these things. Because right here we have a depiction of, you know, horse warriors in a battle scene, and apparently this used to be a burial mound right here as well. And so 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, people from that time period sitting here performing a ritual, you know, under a burial mound, or, you know, having put a burial mound here, just like what mindset those people would have had in those ancient past, speaking a language we no longer speak, worshiping deities we no longer know. And so that's one of my meditations, is like, I can't give you the name of that deity, I can't tell you exactly what ritual they performed, but in a way it grounds me to these places, because you know, it gives us some image, you know, knowing, you know, bring our imagination into play of what happened here in the ancient past. And I don't know, it's one of the things I try to do, and so maybe that helps you out as well, is going to any place. I mean, our world is ancient, and going to these ancient places and just picturing what the world would have been like 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And I don't know, it's a really beautiful thing, and maybe you can try it out. And I just know it definitely helps me out coming to places like this, getting to spend such a brief of time and just grounding myself in the ancient history that is all around us. It's truly wonderful.
Sweden is often overlooked in the larger conversation of ancient Scandinavian religion, mostly because the beauty of the Norwegian fjords and the written source material of Iceland provide a much more direct and dramatic access point to the mythology that would harbor the traditional spiritual practices of the early people of Scandinavia. Even then, we really only know the spiritual practices of those who came in the Iron Age of Northern Europe, with very little evidence of what existed in the Bronze Age and prior. This is where Sweden adds an interesting and important component to our understanding of the cultures that came before what is commonly known around the Viking Age.
I think what separates Sweden a little bit from Denmark and Norway, except Sweden being big and Denmark's not so big to the surface, and Norway, they were so involved in going to Iceland, for example, during the Iron Age, or going to the West a lot. We also did, but in Sweden we have this other type of environment. We have these big forests and so on. We have a lot of land, we have a lot of fertile soil and so on. So we have been able to farm the land differently than in, for example, Denmark or Norway. So since we have good fertility in the soil, we have many rich water sources, we have dense forests with a lot of woods in them and so on. So I think this is what might have led up to us actually having so many ancient places still left to this day. We have a lot of runestones, we have a lot of rock carvings, we have a lot of burial mounds still, and we still find new ones every year. One thing that is unique to Sweden in terms of ancient people and so on is that the modern people of Sweden during the 1600s also created laws about ancient places. So we do have the oldest ancient leavings law in the world here, what you are supposed to do and not to do at ancient places or with ancient objects.
And with that, welcome to my editing dungeon, where I'm sitting here doing the voiceover work for this video. This is the reality of the YouTubing life. A lot of the times I do get to go out to these beautiful sites and take you along with me, but more of the time I'm actually sitting in front of a computer editing these videos, writing scripts, making contacts, making plans, and so it is from the editing dungeon that I ask, if you do love this content, please think about liking and subscribing. It means so much, it helps so much. But if you want to help even more, these videos are a lot of work to make, and it is just me behind the camera, setting all of this up, doing the research and staring at this screen for far too long in the dark as I edit. So if you appreciate the work I do here on the Wisdom of Odin and on this channel, please think about going down below to Patreon. I have a number of tiers down there that you can support me at, and each one gives you a different reward as well. But truly, without the support of the people on Patreon, I would not be able to continue to do this. So any help you're able to provide means a lot, helps a lot. And I thank you for joining me for this video. I welcome you to my editing dungeon. Sometimes it's not this dark, but also make sure we're supporting Elin and her channel, as it's new, it's on YouTube, or at least it's come back, and so she's posting more content there as well. And I really thank her for being a part of this video. And with that, we need to return onto this video on the ancient religions of Sweden, and I need to return to editing that video so that you can watch it later.
It wouldn't be a conversation about Norse paganism or Scandinavian history or Sweden without talking about the Runestones. So a few things that always have to be covered when we talk about the Runestones is they are all across Scandinavia. However, the largest collection of runestones and runic carvings come from Sweden. The vast majority of these come in the younger Futhark, and a lot of them are also Christian. As we can see from this stone right here, there's also a Christian cross. It's in the younger Futhark, and this is also a great example of, often these are not religious stones. They are not dedicated to any one deity. Sometimes they are. I actually saw one just yesterday that mentioned Thor. Literally, this one just says, Olaf raised this for his son who died in Estonia. Like, that is what this says. And then has a depiction of a lion, deer, dragon, and then the cross. Now, just because a lot of these stones are written as memorial stones in the younger Futhark and Christian, does not mean that some of these stones are actually not very magical. Now, surprisingly, only around 20 of these runestones are written in the Elder Futhark language. And this is something that usually needs to be cleared up when people first get interested in the Viking Age and everything prior to it in like the Scandinavian world, is that the majority of these runestones are written in the Younger Futhark, which is the written language at the time of the Viking. The much earlier language comes in the form of the Elder Futhark, which is what most people are more known about because this is the standard Futhark alphabet, beginning with Fehu, Urus, Thurizaz, Anzus, Raidho, Kinaz, and so on. So this is what most people know, although most runestones are written in the Younger Futhark language. And then what makes runes even more complicated is where we know the majority of the information comes from the Anglo-Saxon runes and the runic poems that come from there. So the runes are always an interesting conversation because there's so many caveats. However, in some of the few remaining runestones that we have that are in the Elder Futhark language, we can see some examples of this magical property that is tied to them in poems such as the Havamal, where it talks about Odin sacrificing himself to himself and taking up the runes and learning their spells. And so a few of these runestones still exist today. Around 20 Elder Futhark runestones exist in Sweden still, and some of them actually do bear very magical properties. And so the one I want to read to you here is from the Egya runestone. Obviously, I'm not able to stand there with you today, but the incantation, the spell written on it, is very powerful. The man sprinkled this stone with corpse sea. With it he rubbed the holes of the well-drilled boats. As who came, the army god, hither, onto the land of warriors? A fish swimming out of the terrible stream, a bird screaming into the enemy band. Now what's interesting about the Egya runestone is that the translation into army god is a kinning for some form of deity. This could be Odin, it could be Tyr, it could be Thor, or an unnamed deity that we don't know of. But considering it's in the runes and the spilling of the corpse sea blood into the runes, it could be Odin. It seems like this is what a lot of people tie it to, the army god. And so we have a runestone dedicated to Odin. It's talking about armies coming together. This could very well be a spell, and it definitely fits the language that we see survive in spells within the Poetic Edda. And there's a few more examples of this, including some stones that are using the runes as a protection, saying that no one should desecrate or move or destroy the stone. And so there are examples of the Elder Futhark used in a magical property. But again, as hopefully you can tell, there's just a lot of questions and inconsistencies with the study of runes and a lot of different theories and opinions. But ultimately, again, as I stand here sharing with you a runestone of the ancient past, it's still a wonderful tradition, even into the Christian era. What we have at the end of the day is a father honoring his son in the form of a written language that is supposedly given to these people by the gods. And so, even though it is Christian, you have depictions and history and culture and the honoring of the dead. And I think that's really what to take away from the runic inscriptions and the runestones that are all across Scandinavia and here into Sweden, is the honoring of the dead using the ancient language given to these people by the gods. Something I want to share really quickly before I leave the runestone here is, in my mind, as someone who'd never been to these sites before, you know, even sites all across Europe, is I had this misconception that these sites were in very dramatic places, that there was always just like these massive cliffs or thunderstorms all around them. But when you actually visit them, they're in just very quaint country roads, and then there's a runestone. And I kind of like the casualness of it, where they're not dramatic. They're just peaceful and serene and a part of the world all around them. I mean, sadly, some of them are so casual. They're just like in people's yards. They're, you know, behind people's barns and things like that. So that's not quite as nice. But yeah, you're just driving on the road all the time in places like Sweden or even into like, you know, Scotland and England and Germany. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, what's that? And sometimes, a lot of the times, it's an ancient site or something like this, a runestone. So yeah, I think that's something that's important for me to share as someone that got into Norse paganism, obviously before I ever came to a Scandinavian country. I did have a very romanticized, dramatic vision of what the ancient world looked like. And obviously it looked different in the past, but as it survives today, it's more peaceful than anything else. And I think that's something I really want to constantly teach with this channel, as I think it's more about finding peace in our natural world, more so than the big dramatic Viking show idea that paganism has kind of become through social media and general media over the last few years. So remember the peaceful runestone more than the drama and the grand romantic image.
Sweden has another gift to offer those who are interested in the beliefs of the past. In around the 3rd century, the city of Uppsala appeared in history, a city that would serve as the home of a long dynasty of kings whom were said to have descended from the god Freyr himself. The kingdom would last until the end of the Viking Age and would provide us with one of the most important accounts of pre-Christian Scandinavian religious practices. At one point, the old city of Uppsala, or Gamla Uppsala, was a vast network of houses, halls, burial mounds, and even a temple to the gods.
What is left here now is an open field, museum, church, and the burial mounds that survive. At one point, nearly 3,000 burial mounds existed across this area, both from the Vendel era and the Viking Age. So according to this sign here, there is several boat graves that have been found in that direction near the house, which I guess the priests live now for the church. And so what is special about the grave that was found here is that there was 3 men in separate boats and then a woman with different clothing from around the world, including from China, and even an Arabian coin, it says there. That's absolutely crazy. And on the coin, it depicts a female deity that is suggested to be Freya, and that this could be a boat grave for people going to Folkvagner, which is really fascinating because I've never heard or seen that before. So sadly, it doesn't seem like, we have any of the artifacts, but it's so crazy. Right there used to be a boat grave, possibly for Freya, people going to Folkvagner, and from the Viking Age, which according to my travel companion here, is something that's quite rare, that most boat graves come from the Vendel era?
Yes.
The Vendel era. So one of the things that really stood out to me in the tour of the museum, and something that you can kind of see a little bit, there's not much evidence, but you can kind of picture it in your mind, is they discovered that there was, I believe, 160 poles that were dug into the earth that all went one direction, and they found bones buried under them. And so the theory is that the bones were animal sacrifices and or ritual meals that were prepared and then offered into them, possibly every year for a certain time period. Again, there's a lot of theories around here, but really what to take away from it is that there was these poles, and they probably had bones on them, and they dictated some amount of space, and they were more than likely used for a spiritual reason. I've never seen these in any other site very similar to this. Much like the Yelling Stones, there was a wall erected, but not in the way that was described here in this location.
As I said previously, the sacredness of Gamla Uppsala would continue on for nearly 1,000 years. It is said that the Christian king Igni refused to perform the ritual blot in 1080, and the community was so appalled that they removed this king from power. While the Christian era would eventually win over, as it would across all of Scandinavia, the importance of Gamla Uppsala as a sacred place would be recognized by the church, would establish Sweden's first archbishop here in 1164. The main thing to take away from this information is that blot and rituals were very important to the Swedes of the past, who considered Uppsala to be an incredibly sacred place.
One important note is that the site is still used by the Asatru of Sweden today. They pull out some god poles and actually come up this path right here and then set them up in a nearby field and have a little celebration for the Disir, a Disir blot. And this is a celebration of the female ancestors, the spirits, for fertility in the coming harvest. And supposedly this is something that has been happening here for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Sweden has a magnificent temple, which is called Uppsala. In this temple, built entirely of gold, the people worship the statues of 3 gods. A general festival for all the provinces of Sweden is customarily held at Uppsala every 9 years. The sacrifice is as follows. Of every kind of male creature, 9 victims are offered. By the blood of these creatures is the custom to appease the gods. Their bodies, moreover, are hanged in a grove which is adjacent to the temple. This grove is so sacred to the people that the separate trees in it are believed to be holy because of the death or purification of the sacrificial victims. They even hang dogs and horses beside human beings. Near the temple is a very large tree with widespread branches which are always green both in winter and summer. What kind of tree it is, nobody knows. There is also a spring there where the pagans are accustomed to perform sacrifices and to immerse a human being alive. A golden chain encircles the temple and hangs over the gables of the building. Those who approach it see it gleam from afar, because the shrine, which is located on a plain, is encircled by mountains, so it's situated as to give the effect of a theater. For 9 days, feasts and sacrifices of this kind are celebrated. The sacrifices take place about the time of the vernal equinox.
What I really like about this description of Uppsala is the description of a temple, because this is where we do get some evidence of an enclosed space used to honor the gods. We don't know that much about enclosed spaces outside of like long halls or the standard things such as housing, stables, blacksmithing, and just things for basic survival. So we do know that the ancient Viking people, the Scandinavian people, did have long halls, and it is suggested that they were used possibly for religious purposes to some extent. The identity of a temple is something that kind of eludes us in much of the world. We can at least see in descriptions such as the one given by Adam of Bremen that there was possibly a temple here, and more temples could have existed across Scandinavia. There is an interesting theory that, more of a folklore, that the 3 burial mounds that are the most significant here were actually made for Odin, Freyr, and Thor, but they have dug into 1 or 2 of these burial mounds and found some evidence and some remains and items, so more than likely these were real kings, possibly even a queen supposedly. Now sadly, outside of the 3 main burial mounds that are still here today, there was around 3,000 other burial mounds and ship burials all around this area. Over the last few hundred years, as farming became more prevalent, many of these burial mounds were destroyed and removed. Luckily, we still have some remaining evidence of these burial mounds today, and the whispers of what it used to be in the past, including a drawing that I believe was made in the 1800s about the layout of this place and how many burial mounds used to exist here. So regardless of the specific rituals that occurred here or the lineage of the kings that were buried here, if they were really related to Freyr, what we can really take away from the site here at Gamla Uppsala is the fact that it was very sacred to the people of the past, and the amount of bodies that have been buried here and the long lineage of history that existed here at the same time, possibly a temple and celebrations that occurred maybe every 9 years, but probably a little bit more than that, a series of long poles with bones and offerings in them, a long hall, and then of course the history of the church and the addition of the spiritual significance of this place. The history of Uppsala is kind of messy, like much of the history of the ancient past, but what is left is a really fascinating and really important story about paganism in ancient Sweden.
What I think is important for people from, example, America, that doesn't know too much about Scandinavia or Sweden and so on, Swedes in particular are very, very curious, they're very welcoming, they're very open. We might be a bit shy and quiet at first, but we also believe a lot in coming together, sharing and so on. And I think that that is one thing that has shown again and again through history in Sweden, because we have so many ancient leavings from different cultures. Like we have the Buddha of Björke, for example. There's a Buddha statue that someone during the Viking Age just got to them, and maybe it was given to them, who knows, maybe they bought it. And another thing that kind of ties into that as well, I think is important to know, is we have so many cultural expressions that are so, either they are so tied into religious practices that we don't notice, or they are so separate, because religion in Sweden is so like it's so personal, so you might not even know what someone you know in real life what they believe in and so on. And that also comes with curiosity, acceptance and so on, that we aren't as like black and white on things. We are very like, oh okay, like we kind of go with it. As we say in Sweden, we take it with a kick. Like we're kind of like, we don't take it too seriously either. We're kind of like, we do our thing and like we go with it, go with the flow.
Naturally, this is not all the information that exists about the spiritual beliefs of the ancient Swedes. And I look forward to coming back to Sweden to continue my research into this wonderful country and meeting its amazing people like Elin, who was so kind to offer up her time to record this video, as well as my video on Midsummer that is also available on this channel. Please check out our work on Instagram and YouTube to learn more about the specific ancient sites here in Sweden. And be sure to keep checking back on my channel here, for my adventures next month take me even deeper into the Nordic countries. But until then, my name is Jacob Todson, and I wish you a happy midsummer from Sweden, a land of deep magic and eternal sun.